I am the Vice President of the Historical Society, and thank you so much for coming to our last fall seminar series. I'm sure you're going to enjoy our speaker. If any of you, if this is the first time you've been in the building and you'd like to have a tour, we have a couple of our volunteers here and they'd be happy to show you around. We have 3 floors of exhibits, so we have a lot of interesting artifacts, so if you'd like to do that, just let us know after the presentation. And we are a totally volunteer organization. We have no paid employees. Everyone is a volunteer. And the only way we can keep our doors open is by our membership fees and by donations. So we're just happy to have you here. And our speaker tonight is Jane Cleary. And Jane is one of our 2 genealogists that volunteer here at the Historical Society. And if you are a member, you are entitled to 8 hours of free help from our genealogists, which is quite a nice perk if you're into genealogy. And before she retired, she was a librarian at Slippery Rock University. And now, in addition to all the work she does here, she is the historian for the, I gotta get this right, the Citizens Environmental Association of the Slippery Rock area. And, and she's going to give us a review of the 35 years of their history. Okay, Jane?
Thank you, Jean. Well, delighted to see you here tonight and appreciate your coming. Wanted to say one more thing about our lovely hotel. This was a hotel for the whole last century, and if you ever want to, if you're a member, you can host events here like a class party, class reunion. If you're not a member, you can pay a small fee and have gatherings here as well. It's a wonderful building. The whole upstairs is organized into different rooms, different topics, and like we said, we'd be glad to give you a tour sometime. Okay, well, I will begin. Excuse me. As Jean said, CEASRA stands for the Citizens Environmental Association of the Slippery Rock area, and we're glad to be celebrating our 35th year this year. The group was founded back in 1987 in Slippery Rock. It was a group of residents in the community, and it's a non-profit organization, which means we can't take any political positions for candidates or parties. It's a 501(c), and so its contributions are tax deductible. And our mission is to protect the environment and preserve the natural resources of the surrounding communities. Back in 1987, when they started, the issue they formed came together for was the Butler County Sewer Authority wanted to dump their sludge into an old mined hole in the Branchton area, east of Slippery Rock. And so the group met several times with these developers, and they were successful in convincing them to, instead of creating this sludge landfill, they would open a composting facility. So it was kind of a win-win situation. They made more money having a composting facility than they did if it was a sewer sludge. I got involved in 1990 when CEASRA took on Project No, which had to do with a federal plan to deal with all the nuclear waste in the country. There was a mandate that every region, groups of states, would have to take care of a certain amount of nuclear waste. And so the plan was, let's go to western Pennsylvania, and they came to Plain Grove, and they were planning to create an incinerator where they would burn the nuclear waste. And people got really crazy about that. We had 21,000 people sign petitions, and we were successful in defeating that plan. After they were defeated in this area, they went up to Cleary and they thought they were going to be successful there. But if they thought we were a bunch of junkyard dogs, they really had trouble with the Clarion River people, and they didn't cite the incinerator there either. And I never did hear about them citing it anywhere, so I don't know what happened. How many of you are familiar with the Osborne Superfund site? Okay, that's good. A lot of people don't know that we have that here in Grove City. Back in the 80s, the EPA put together what they called the National Priorities List. They ascertained what were the 50 most toxic places in the nation, and Grove City was one of them. And it was this Osborne. It wasn't really a landfill, it had never been permitted or anything, but it's where a lot of the industries in the area had been dumping harmful chemicals. And of course, we didn't know as much as we do today about all this stuff. It's located, if you go past the post office on Pine, you go far enough and you turn onto Diamond, and right there at the corner, that's where the Osborne Superfund site is. So the reason they discovered it, these drums were filled with different chemicals that were used as degreasers in the steel industry, and but they degrade. So it might have been tetrachloroethylene, but after so many years it degraded down into vinyl chloride. And this started to come out of people's tap water who had wells in the area. And so they decided to begin the cleanup in 1995. And they brought in the hazmat suits, and everybody took away these drones, the ones that still had liquid in them, and the materials that they could remove. But obviously a lot of the liquids had already, rusted through and were in the site. So they put it out to the lowest bidder, of course, and the plan was they thought they had bedrock, and that they would build a slurry wall all the way around the area and pump out the remaining liquid, put it through a plant to remove the toxins, and then shoot that liquid out into the community up by Enterprise Road in that area. So they did that, and the literature said that if you have wells in this area, you shouldn't drink it for 5 years. Now, I don't know if anybody lived in this area. When I came, I was in the area. I never saw any of that literature, but that's what the official brochure said, that the upper Clarion aquifer was damaged with vinyl chloride, and it was not safe to drink for 5 years. So anyway, the EPA thought they would get it cleaned up in a couple of years, and with the Superfund site, they have to come back every 5 years and give the community a report. So they did. And they said, well, we didn't quite get it cleaned up. A lot of the monitoring wells are still showing degradation. So 5 years later, they came, and I think that's when I got involved. They had material. They put on a slideshow, and they said, well, we're having a lot of progress. This well's better, this well's better, this well's clean. And we had already read the raw data, and we knew that the quarterly testing showed, yeah, this well was clean on this particular date, but 3 months later it spiked back to the high levels of vinyl chloride. So we brought that up and said, that we understood things were not good. They always were asking if they could shut down the plant and stop treating this liquid. And at least 2 times they came, and CEASRA said, no, we see that things are not good. Eventually, they convinced the township supervisors, because this is in Pine Township, I believe, that they would shut down the plant. What they learned as they went along was that because of all the heavily mined area in this area, there were not discrete aquifers. So they were cleaning up one aquifer, and they would get it, pretty clean, but then it was sucking up water from below, which was also contaminated, and from above. So they had a much more complex problem than they expected. And even today, the last time they came, I think it was in 2021, most of the monitoring wells are showing progress and attenuation and are clean, but there are still some wells that are not clean. Now, they did make Cooper Bessemer pay for this, as well as General Electric and some of the other companies. And they did give city water to the people living in the area. If people wanted it, they gave them public water. So that's been quite an episode. In 2002, there was another issue that CEASRA got involved in. I'm sure you're all familiar with beautiful McConnell's Mills. There was there were efforts. They wanted to do mining right at the entrance to the mill, as well as putting a landfill there. And so CEASRA didn't do this alone. There were a number of groups that were fighting to preserve McConnell's Mills. And we were successful there. They did not put the landfill there, and it's still a wonderful place. This was an issue we were not so successful with. Are any of you familiar with the West Liberty Esker? One person, okay. An esker is a geological formation, kind of a mound, a long serpentine kind of a formation. And it was used by the native people in the area for religious ceremonies. And it was one of the most well-preserved eskers in the state. And in addition, there were a lot of, several endangered species in the area. And it's in Butler County, south of Slippery Rock. So they wanted to mine it for sand and gravel. And unfortunately, we were not successful in keeping that from happening, and took these pictures this year. So this is what this looks like today. Now, I'm sure it'll get restored eventually, and it won't look like this, but, this was a part, and I don't know if they've restored some of if they cut into the whole area, but they certainly did damage parts of this esker. This was another effort where we were more successful. The north of here, there is the headwaters of 3 different watersheds. Our Wolf Creek watershed and the Sandy Creek. I always forget this. I think it's Sandy Creek and a third one. I always forget. But they were planning to do coal mining up there, and they were going to blast at that location where the headwaters were located. So we were successful working with several other watershed groups, and they did not blast in that area. In CEASRA, we have a speaker series where we are available to speak to different groups. And this is Jen Michael speaking to a group of middle school students about ecology and the environment. We also work with the Girl Scouts in Grove City. They asked us to come talk to them about recycling and about garbage and issues here in our area. And they came up with a wonderful idea. They worked with their fellow students in the junior high, teaching them to separate out, first of all, any reusable foods that had not been touched, let's say a milk carton that nobody drank. They put those all in one area, and that was taken to the local food pantry. Then they separated out food scraps and biodegradables for a compost pile, and then, of course, the recyclables and the products, the plastics. So they had the compost pile by the middle school, and then they created a garden. And this was so successful, they then did the same thing at the high school. So I thought that was a terrific project that they put together. Another speaker we had more recently was Dr. John Stoltz, who's the director of the Duquesne University Center for Environmental Research and Education. And he spoke to the Grove City community about radioactivity and fracking waste. And this brings us to the present with the project that we're currently working very hard with. CEASRA has joined with Liberty Township to try to overturn the permit that was given by the DEP in 2020 to Tri-County Landfill to reopen. Now, a little bit of information about the history of the Tri-County Landfill. Back in the 50s, it was an unpermitted dump, just like the Osborne. The Osborne was much smaller. It was more like 40 acres, I believe, and the Tri-County is over 100 acres. Now, unfortunately, they have the same exact materials in them. The EPA did testing, and so a lot of those horrendous chemicals that were in the Osborne are also at Tri-County, or they were. A lot of volatile organic compounds have lifted off, but the heavy metals are still there. So it was first permitted in 1985 by the Vogel family, and then there were new regulations that came into existence in 1990 by the DEP, requiring all landfills in the state to have a liner put under the garbage mass. And so Tri-County put together an application and applied to reopen. But in 1997, they were denied their application because of their proximity to the airport. There's a federal regulation that says landfills cannot be within 6 miles of airports because the birds feed on the refuse and then they fly up into the airplanes, and it causes quite a danger. So they denied them in 97 because of the airport. So Tri-County worked with some experts, and they reapplied, and their plan was, in their next application, they said, all right, we're going to put the garbage down at night when the birds are sleeping, and we'll cover it up in the daytime with construction demolition debris. They won't know it's there, and this will solve that problem. So the DEP said, we are, actually, I think every time they got denied, they would appeal it. And when they were denied, I think here, they appealed it. And I'm pretty sure it was at this point, the DEP said, okay, we're going to do a settlement here. We will invite you to reapply, and you're going to confine you to the space you had, and we're going to overlook the fact that you're so close to the airport, because even though this wasn't you back in the 50s, the ordinance, the legislation came in after the 50s, and it was a dump here. So we're going to kind of grandfather you regarding the airport. That was the settlement. So they applied again, but this time the DEP said, okay, technically we're not going to hold you to the 6 mile limit, but for a landfill in Pennsylvania, you have to prove that you're going to be more beneficial than harmful. And we know that there's still going to be this danger with the birds, and so we're turning you down. So they reapplied, and this time, maybe it was in here that they came up with the bird plan. This time they said, all right, you got that plan with the birds and the nighttime waste. However, you've got a pretty bad violation history. And in addition, there's the issue of zoning. So when Tri-County started, they were planning to put a 200 foot high landfill. And they had contracts with the 5 boroughs of New York City, Canada, the whole East Coast, Connecticut, New England states, going to bring it across 80, and the landfill was going to be 200 feet high. And so when they denied them in 2013, they said, well, zoning is also an issue because the local townships say that structures can only be 40 feet high. And Tri-County said, well, we're not a structure. They said, well, yeah, you are, because there are pipes in the landfill to take away the methane gas and the leachate. Leachate is, when it rains through the mass of a landfill, it filters through all of the debris, and it creates a lot of liquid that is toxic, and it has to be removed. So they said, okay, this time we're going to say no because of your violation history, lots of violations, and the zoning. So Tri-County went back to the drawing table, and they put together another permit application, and they said, all right, we'll only be 40 foot high, and then they did clean up their violation history. They don't have nearly as many violations. So they applied, and finally in 2020, the DEP granted them a waste permit. But now in 2020, there was something in the waste permit that had never been before in the application. They now said they were going to be bringing in fracking waste from the drilling industry. So they applied in 2018, they got the permit in 2020, and in 2021, CEASRA in Liberty Township filed an appeal to overturn that permit. We had filed with the, it's called the Environmental Hearing Board, that's a wing of the DEP. Now I imagine you're all familiar with fracking. This is what has gone on across the state and the nation to recover gas. And so the fracking process involves millions of gallons of, more than a million, it says in this diagram for one well, gallons of water, in addition to sand and chemicals. And originally, the drilling companies would not reveal what were in those chemicals that were part of this fracking process. We've come to learn that in addition to some of these carcinogenic chemicals, they have included uranium. And so that helps to break up the rock, and uranium itself is radioactive. But there's a lot of naturally occurring radon in our land in Pennsylvania. So they, with very intense pressure, shove the liquid and the chemicals into the ground. There's a horizontal line that then fracks the rock, and the sand helps to hold the area apart so the gas can be released. And so then you have a lot of flowback with this liquid. All the liquid comes back up, and the liquid is recovered as well as the gas. But now you have a problem where you're going to put that liquid as well as the rest of the materials that come up. Now, both in the application and in the permit, Tri-County has indicated they're going to be bringing in a lot of things, including drilling residuals. And this is the text from the permit. In addition to covering this up every day with things like sewer sludge, they're going to use auto fluff, they're going to have asbestos, all kinds of building materials, but they're going to also have non-coaling mine waste, oil and gas, and other well drilling waste. So they did reveal that this was their plan. However, it was very interesting, and we only discovered this after a lot of research. There are actually about 5 applications. There's the waste permit, there's a permit for the air, the wetlands, the creek where they're going to put the leachate. And in these applications, there was a question: will your project have anything to do with an oil and gas well or the waste from such a well? And 4 separate times in the application, Tri-County lied, and they put no. These are actual photographs from the application. The reason they put no, if they put yes, then it would have required the EPA to come in and do a review. So they were not forthcoming. We pointed this out to the DEP, but they let that slide. And they evidently, what we're finding out now all across the state, these NPDES permits have been probably, lied when they've applied, or the DEP has said we're going to waive the EPA review, which legally they're not allowed to do that. Now, as I mentioned, the Marcellus Shale that they're drilling through, as well as the Utica, in Pennsylvania is the most radioactive shale in the nation. And that's why the drilling companies waited to drill us last. I mean, they started in places like Texas where the naturally occurring radon was not as high. And as I mentioned, in addition, we've learned that some drillers are using uranium as part of the toxic liquid that they're forcing down into the shale. So we know that the fracking waste is going to be radioactive. Now here is another reason we know this. In 2016, the DEP commissioned a study to look at TENORM, technologically enhanced naturally occurring radioactive material. And in this study, they looked at places all over the state where there is radioactive material, including 51 landfills. That's not all the landfills in the state, but they picked out 51, including the Seneca landfill in Butler County, which is owned by Vogel Holdings. And Vogel Holdings owns about 12 different subsidiaries, including the transfer station, Tri-County Landfill, trucking companies, and Seneca Landfill. Seneca Landfill turned out to be among the top 9 of the 51 for the volume of radioactive waste they take. And this is significant because when Tri-County applied for their permit, they made a point of saying, we're going to be very similar to Seneca. In fact, a lot of the garbage that used to go to Seneca and maybe stopped at the transfer station, now it's going to stay here. So all that radioactive waste they had, we're going to have now. In addition, for the NPDES, that's the National Pollution Discharge Elimination System permit, the Tri-County had to submit vials of liquid of their current leachate in the old landfill, and so they did, but they substituted 4 vials of liquid from Seneca because they said, we're going to be just like them. So, we know Seneca's radioactive. When they did this 10-arm study, first of all, the study, you can look it up online, and it's very extensive, but they didn't tell you the names of the different landfills they were looking at. So there were 51 of them, but they just gave them a number. And fortunately, there is a group called Public Herald. It's a journalistic public investigative group. And under the Right to Know Act, they were able to find out the names of all these landfills. Now, they put together an article, and you can read that online, publicherald.org. We found the names of the radioactive waste locations that the government kept secret. Now, when you go to that article, you'll see this map of the state, and it's an interactive map. And it's showing you all of the landfills that we know about from this report, the 51 they looked at, across the state. Those are identified with circle. We have so much radioactive waste in the state, we're dumping it on the roads. So if a township says it's okay, they can get some real cheap de-icer. They'll come in and put the brine right on the roads as a de-icer in the winter, and they use it in the summer to suppress the dust. So wherever you see one of these little triangles, that's where they're putting radioactive brine. The other places they looked at were centralized waste treatment facilities, publicly owned treatment facilities, well pads, and you can see over here, this is Mercer County, and we have a well pad in Mercer. This is Butler County, and there are 2 radioactive landfills, and one of them is Seneca. And this is the Seneca. You can see Newcastle has some radioactive sites. In Newcastle, there is the Covanta Environmental Solutions. Some solution. Here's what's going on there. They tallied the incoming influent, unfiltered, came in at 54 picocuries per liter of radium. And after they cleaned it up and solved the problem, they shot it out into probably the creek. I don't know if it went into Shenango River, but it went out at 203 picocuries. Now, just as a point of reference, the drinking water standard for radium is 5 picocuries per liter. So it comes in at 54, it goes out at 203. The reason is radium lasts for a really long time, 1,600 years. And so, they might have taken out some other chemicals in this process, but they really did not help the radioactive level. It only got hotter. Now, they did some extra analysis of Seneca landfill because Seneca landfill is dumping leachate right into Connoquenessett Creek. And they tallied the level of radioactive radium at 123 picocuries of radium per liter. Now, another point of reference, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is in charge of monitoring laboratories and in-site facilities like atomic energy plants. And in such a plant, or a lab, let's say a lab, if there was a beaker and it spilled of radium and it was above 60, they would shut the place down because, you know, they have the hazmat suits and whatever. So 123 is rather high. When you look at the online study, again, you're not going to see Seneca landfill. LF4 is the number for Seneca. And this is just the kind of chart. It's a very extensive report. So if you find table C38, you can see of the uranium series, the landfill is 118 radium-226, and then in the thorium series, so there are lots of different radioactive materials, not just uranium. So Seneca's got 5, and the total is 123. So they're dumping it into the creek, and as disturbing as that is, I assumed this was a violation. But no, it's not a violation. The DEP is allowing them to do that. And so I called up the DEP to say, you know, at what level would you not allow them to dump it in there? And the answer I got from a water quality specialist was there are no regulations. And he told me that 3 times. And I was just dumbfounded that there could be no regulations. He said, no, there are no federal regulations, there are no state regulations. And I said, how long have you been working there? I thought surely he's mistaken. He said, what are you, a reporter? I said, no, I'm just a citizen who thinks that somebody downstream is drinking this water. I said, you know, what about the drinking water level? He said, this is not drinking water. This is the waterways of Pennsylvania. Different standards. There are no standards. And so we've been trying to research that, but it's true. And Senator Katie Muth has been working on this very issue, the fact that there are no standards for this. Now, this brings us to our situation here. This is a map from the permit application. And it looks like a really old map, and that's because it is. They pulled out a map that was 50 years old. And so this map, just to give you some orientation, here is 79. This is 208. You're probably all aware of where the landfill is located, right across from the credit union. You don't really see this landfill from the road because mine spoils are here and trees. This is Center Church Road. They've labeled it as Hodel's Road, which is the name 50 years ago. They picked this old map because it doesn't show the legends. All of these really nice homes that have been developed in the last 20 years, they don't show. And when we brought this up in our appeal, the lawyer was like, well, we don't know, we don't have evidence that there's anything there. And it's like, well, no, not if you use an old map, you're not going to see the homes that are existing today. So the current permit, when they put it together, they said, well, we got 3 choices for the leachate. Now the leachate is between 65,000 and 125,000 gallons a day. That's the liquid. It's hard to imagine there's that much coming off of this landfill, about 100 acres. But that's what they're going to have, they're estimating. And so they said, well, our first plan is we want to give it to the Grove City Sewer Authority. And the Grove City Sewer Authority said, no, thank you, we're not taking that. Mm-hmm. So they had another plan, and the plan was to dump it into the creek. Mm-hmm. So they said, we'll put together a processing plant, like that great one that's in Newcastle, and then we're going to shoot it out over here to the left of the landfill and dump it right here. This is Route 258, mm-hmm. close to the road. There, you know, it's a wetland there. It's a very high water table. And the tributary to Black Run is going right there. So they plan to dump it there. Now, if you go down on this map, here you can see this is Amsterdam Road. And I don't know if you've been Amsterdam Road, where it intersects with 258 is where they have the big rail brewery. If you've ever been there and you sit there outside on the grass and you look down into the creek, that's this creek. And then if you go down a little further, that tributary runs right through Keystone Safari. And the animals, as you know, they go right to the creek and drink. So in our appeal to the DEP to overturn this permit, we said this is a really bad plan because there are endangered species in Keystone Safari. There's also a zip line. My nephew and he's brought his kids, and the kids can jump off that zip line and walk right down to the creek. Now they're not, saved by any EPA regulation, but the endangered species are. So this runs down south. Eventually it forks over and it comes north again, and it comes across Amsterdam Road, and then it hits Wolf Creek right about where Kimberly Estates is. So that was the plan. Now I have to say, we're very proud that we've changed that plan. It may appear. In the litigation this summer, we would submit a lot of information. Like we submitted 75 facts why they should not give them this, should overturn the permit. Then we would submit all these exhibits. And I think we must have done a pretty good job regarding this creek issue. In addition to that, we asked them for a public hearing. And many of you may have attended the public hearings over the last 20 years that were held at the high school. And that's where we were talking about the waste permit. Well, it was during COVID in 2021, and we got a hearing. It was over Zoom, but we had a lot of people give testimony, residents like yourselves, township supervisors, lawyers, scientists, gave testimony as to why, this was the NPDES permit about dumping it in the creek, why they should not do that. And they never got back to us to say, well, good job. But in this appeal, some of the paperwork, and you can read all of the documents we've submitted, they're all online at the Environmental Hearing Board website. You can read what the other side has submitted as well. The DEP said, well, we've changed our mind, and right now we're going to make them truck it away in tankers. Now, where are they going to truck it? They've got 2 contracts, and one is with Seneca Landfill. So in a way, this is a really very small victory. It may not be in our creek, but they're going to probably dump it in the Connequanessa Creek. So it's a very hollow victory. But we bring it up because it does show that they're listening a little bit. They know that we're paying attention. And our lawyer doesn't even think we can believe it. She thinks, okay, they're going to tanker it away for a while, but they're still going to try to get that NPDES permit, and when we're not looking, they'll give them that permit. They've already given them a draft permit. It's got a number on it and everything. So that was certainly the intention. Now, there's still many other reasons to object to this landfill. And I have to say, there are people on the other side who think the landfill is a great idea. Mr. Vogel has said he would like to pick up those old toxins that are also with the Osborne, put them on a liner, and that would be more protective. So there are, different perspectives.
Do you believe Vogel?
Well, personally, I know the track record. He has accepted hazardous waste himself, and so.
I wouldn't answer that if I were you, Jane.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody's got their own opinion. Yeah. But there are 2 sides.
Sorry.
Certainly to every issue. But what we have found is that there's going to be 4,000 tons of daily waste, and that's still going to be radioactive. And there's a researcher at Ohio State, and she said, these landfills across the state of Pennsylvania, you're just creating small, nuclear reactors, because it's going to be there forever. Your children, your grandchildren. And so the leachate may be going elsewhere, but that material matter is still going to be there. As I mentioned, the radium itself lasts for 1,600 years. Once this, cover that they spray the brine, and it dries, it's going to be airborne, and it's going to be radioactive dust. And the wind's coming out of the west, it's going to blow right into Grove City, and everything east of the landfill. In addition, there's going to be a 50-foot silo on the property that's going to be burning the methane gas. Now, Vogel was given an award by the state of Pennsylvania for his creative conversion of methane gas from the Seneca landfill into fuel for his fleet of trucks. And he originally said that's what he was going to do here. But I guess you can't do that at the beginning, or maybe he's never going to do it. But the air permit didn't talk about that at all. It showed this methane tower that's going to be burning night and day the gas. And it's going to be much, it's 50 foot high, so it's going to be higher than the landfill itself, and you can see from the tree line. There's still going to be this danger of the birds. And I love this photo of Captain Sullenberger, who landed the U.S. Air passenger plane on the Hudson. And, it was a group of Canada geese that flew into this plane. And, we certainly have a lot of birds in this area already, but that will also be attracted to the landfill. And then there's the problem with the workers. A lot of these workers are totally unaware of how they're endangering their own lives. It is the responsibility of PennDOT to put placards on these tankers as they bring the brine from the well pad to Tri-County. They should be placarded with, hazardous waste, so that if there's an accident or just the workers who are working with it are aware, of what they're dealing with. But PennDOT has not done that because there's no regulation that the drillers have to be testing everything. Now, the average radioactivity level at a well pad is about 22,000 picocuries. So this brine is definitely toxic, and this is going to be a problem for the workers. Now, if this all wasn't enough, recently we've learned about PFAS. I just spoke to a group of Slippery Rock University students, and they were focusing on PFAS. So I brought this up in that PFAS are forever chemicals. They, if you're familiar with Teflon skillets, those are PFAS. So it's very slick. It's also used in the photographic film back in the day when people took photographs. So these are forever chemicals, very slick. They're very long chains of molecules, and they're wonderful for drilling because they ease the flow of oil from the ground. So when this was brought to the attention of the EPA, they had a lot of great concerns, but they approved it anyway. And through a Freedom of Information Act, this was information uncovered not that long ago, and this report was published by the New York Times last year. So what are our actions now? We, in our appeal, have hired experts, two notable experts, John Stoltz, whose photograph you saw earlier, who's the director of the Duquesne University Center for Environmental Research and Education, and he's put together a report, and he would also testify if we go into court. He's done a lot of research looking at other landfills, specifically Westmoreland landfill. They were taking their leachate to the treatment plant, and the treatment plant found that its natural bacteria were all dead. And they don't test for radioactive material at waste treatment plants, but he went in and he tested it, and he found that the leachate coming in was radioactive, and that's what killed all the bacteria. So there was an injunction, and the judge said, okay, they don't have to allow them to take that leachate there anymore. They stopped, took it somewhere else, probably Seneca, or possibly Seneca, and so that treatment plant restored its bacteria and effectiveness. So anyway, he's going to be a great expert for us. We also have employed Dr. Russ DeFusco, a retired lieutenant colonel. He is terrific. He has written FAA circulars on this issue. He has consulted with military armies, Air Force bases all over the world, as well as airports all over the United States and the world. and his specialty is bird strikes. And so he informed us that this regulation about the 6-mile limit, it only applies if your airport has regularly scheduled flights. Well, our airport does not have regularly scheduled flights. So technically, we're probably not going to win on those grounds. However, they also do require that there be like a 12-month study and that there be analysis to see, how many birds are there and how many airstrikes are there. And one of the other factors is that Grove City Airport is owned by the borough, and they have received a number of federal grants for airport improvement. And Dr. DeFusco said they probably won't be getting those grants in the future if they're not obeying the advice of these circulars. So we are currently in what's called summary judgment. I'm learning a lot about law that I certainly never knew and don't even know too well right now. But summary judgment is where the parties are able to say to the judge, we think we have a pretty good case, here are our facts, and could you just declare us the winners without going to court? So we did that, Tri-County and the DEP did that, and the judge should have his decision, we think, by the end of the month. I'm pretty sure he's going to say, no, this is too complex, we're going to have to go to court. And then we'll go to court. The earliest would be the end of December. And regardless of what the decision is, we're pretty sure if we would win, Tri-County is going to appeal it all the way, probably to the Supreme Court again. Now, what can anybody do? Well, State Representative Innamorato has some bills in the House. There are House bills, 3 House bills and 3 Senate bills that would require monitoring so that at the well pad, the materials would get monitored. They would get monitored for the radioactive level before they enter a landfill and before the leachate gets out of the landfill. However, these 6 bills have been stalled in the Pennsylvania Environmental Resources and Energy Committee. Mr. Darrell Metcalf is the chair of that committee, and he is retiring in December. So we, hope springs eternal. We hope that maybe these will get heard eventually and brought before the full House and Senate for a vote.
Why has it been stalled? Why have they been stalling on this?
Well, that's a real good question. It's been stalled because the legislature, I would say, is very pro-industry, and they would not want to do anything that is going to negatively affect the oil and gas industry. And if, it sounds sort of benign, just monitor it and write down how hot it is. Well, if it's a really hot load, then they're going to have to do something with it. And maybe it won't be just putting it on the roads, Maybe they're going to have to take it to Utah and bury it in the ground, which is what a lot of radioactive waste, that's where it goes. So it's financial, I'm sure. It's a big reason. So what else can you do? Well, you can join CEASRA, help this appeal. We have written a number of grants, and we've received 6 grants, and we're in the process now of applying for more grants. So we are trying to get funding from many different sources. We've got signs if you'd like to help spread the word. So many people don't even know that this is an issue because they've been turned down so many times. I think people think, oh, that's really not an issue anymore. We welcome suggestions. We do have a website. We're on Facebook. If you look up No Trash Mountain, we're also at CEASRAPA.com. And we welcome your suggestions and or questions. You can also contact the DEP and tell them that you don't want this landfill because you don't want radioactive waste stored in Grove City. I still think back to when we, Project No was victorious in sending away those federal guys just because enough people spoke up. So, we're kind of past the time, but I just wonder how the DEP would respond if hundreds of people, were calling them all the time saying, we know what you're doing, So I thank you all for coming, and I'll open it up for questions if you have anything to put some lights on.
Well, I know getting the grants is helpful, but the attorney is expensive. And we're gonna have this attorney who's good for a long, long time. And so, my wife's too nice, but in fundraising, you have to do the ask. We're asking for money at some point, at some point. It's whatever,
Thank you.
okay? But the idea is that I've been on the outside looking. I retired 2 years ago from Slippery Rock. And the amount of work that's gone into this, and many of you have been involved in this, know it's thousands upon thousands of hours. And frankly, it's been a little bit more than frustrating because all our good friends around here, we know we've been here for decades, like, oh, the airport will protect us. And that's a crock, okay? It's way complicated, and that slide tray, I hope it didn't mess up your dinner, okay, or your blood pressure, or now you're taking away your appetite, now you don't want to get dessert. But this is what happens a lot of places, okay? We're not unique, and Jane is correct. When these things happen and they were dumped in all these companies, they didn't know that, okay? Nobody's saying no. They did that today, definitely some real finger pointing, but it's the environment. And you know, back in the day it was, well, the solution to pollution is dilution. If we put it in enough ocean water, it's not going to be bad. Well, we shouldn't be putting it in the Pacific either, okay? But again, at some point, it just means, you know, just people also just giving a little bit of whatever money they can afford. I know and the price of gas is high and everything. Now, okay, thank you. Well, I guess I'm usually the one who cuts people off. Okay. All right. Well, I'll warm up the car and I'll go out and get some ice cream.
Thank you for bringing up the cookies too. We have a wonderful array of
Yes, we have
beautiful
great
homemade
cookies.
cookies. I want to introduce Bill Pritchard, who's in the back row there. He's president of CEASRA, and he's been our leader.
Can I make a comment?
Sure.
I'm going to follow up on your
No, you better
your advice. No, I'll be very quick. This appeal, we are fighting the DEP and Tri-County. So we're fighting two sets of attorneys. Our cost, and Liberty Township's going to be incurring cost as well, we're going to have to spend somewhere between, probably up to $70,000 on this. And we're raising that money through the grants, through grassroots, through fundraisers. But, I mean, we know that we're going to have to raise between now and year end another $40,000 to $50,000. What you can do, besides contributing, is talk to people in the community. Again, we just need a lot of people giving $5, $15, $20, $50, and we can make up this deficit. So talk to people that the landfill is coming. CEASRA and Liberty are your only barriers to that being successful, and get people talking about it and asking about it, and we will open up our coffers and open up our pockets to take the money. We have no paid staff. All the money goes directly into the landfill appeal and other service activities. There's no paid staff. Thank you very much.
Any other questions or comments, suggestions?
I'm thinking about this fundraising. I do this all the time. I think if the word is, this is about your health, this is about your neighbor's health, this is about your grandchildren's health, people understand that much more than, oh, this is leaking in, blah, blah, blah. You know, if you were to go door to door, I think, you know, the health thing is a money raiser.
So maybe we need to promote that aspect more.
Yes, and maybe the Grove City Hospital Foundation, who purports to be all about people's health, and they're sitting on $32 million, maybe they could help.
Well, and that's one of the places we're applying for the
Yeah.
grant. The deadline is to 27th of this month, so we're scurrying around for that one. But yeah, we think, you know, have you heard about that? It sounds like it would be something, if they're focused on health, that they might be open to us. So I hope that'll be true. Tom?
At the beginning of your talk, you talked about real close to Grove City, out Pine Street, and close to Diamond Road. There's a big building there. Is that all part of this?
Yes.
Yes.
What do they do there?
That building was where the treatment plant was, that was treating the liquid that was under the ground. And that's the plant that is currently shut down. John, I don't know if you know any more about it. It's all fenced off and you can't get in there.
Right.
But it doesn't look like what it looked like back in the day. Any update that you know, John?
Nothing I know that we had one man who was still working for Cooper Bessemer up into, I don't know exactly how long, but up into the, at least the teens and so forth, that was operating that plant, and his job was to test to make sure that everything that was in the wells in that area was within spec. Now, I think he has since retired, and that's all I know.
And as I say, they still are required every 5 years to come in and do a report. They're supposed to publicize it in the paper. There's supposed to be records at the library, and you can find some things here at the community library about it. You can go online too and read all of these 5-year annual reports with information.
And Dick Lansdorf was the man who was
right,
running it.
Right. Right.
I just had a question also. I don't live here. We're John's daughters. This may or may not be a good example, but the movie with Julia Roberts, I can't think of the name of that movie. Yeah, thank you. Where they had citizens tested, that were coming up with all kinds of cancer and horrible things, if it's in the groundwater already,
Well, and we had a
can you
program-
prove that people have already been affected?
Yeah,
you
you
know?
can. And it shows up with the PFAS quicker than it does the radium. The radioactivity may take, decades to create cancer in a person. But we had a program in July, and we had 2 speakers come from Washington County where they've already done a lot of drilling, and they've got much more experience down there with radioactive sites. One man came with his son. They both have been tested for PFAS, and they have high levels. So they had a well pad right on their property, and it destroyed their water.
Yeah.
But now they were tested, and they have high levels of PFAS in their bodies.
Yeah.
And they reported that we all, like 95% of the people in the United States, have PFAS in their bodies because, we've eaten from the Teflon skillet and scratched it, and it's lots of different places. It's protective on clothing, The poor policemen, I don't mean policemen, firemen, they've got that retardant on their clothing, and so they've got high levels in their bodies. So yeah, now we don't have all this radioactive waste yet, so we're not going to be testing people for that, but yeah.
A lot of children's clothes have the fire retardant on it.
Exactly.
And they've had it on for about 60 years.
Yeah, that's why we all have it in our bodies, and it's a carcinogen. And anyway, so this man and his son, his 12-year-old son, the man especially is already having some severe health problems. So I think we're going to see this across the country where people are going to realize that it's affecting all of us. Well, thank you all again for coming. I appreciate it. Please enjoy.